everybody, I'm Nick, and today I have with me lead C# designer Mads Torgersen. Mads, welcome to the video. Well, this only took 5 takes to manage, but we got there. So yeah, we're here at NDC London. I finished with my talk yesterday. You had a couple of talks, one yesterday, one today, if I'm not wrong. And we're here to talk all about C# 13 and C# 14. And mostly discriminated unions.
Okay, all right. Well, that's
joking.
not a complete surprise.
Everyone has been asking, and I actually did go today as you were delivering your talk, and I scanned through it to see what you talked about.
Yeah.
And I love that at the end of the talk, you had 2 minutes of, this is union types, bye. You're talking nothing about them. And given everything that has happened with them being designed and then tried to be redesigned, and you recently, well, I say recently, a few months ago, you released what they will potentially look like when they eventually make it into the language. I want to talk about that, but before that, I want to just congratulate you for the C# 13 release.
Thank you.
I have my personal favorite feature for that release, and that is the parameters, expression, the new parameters, things we can do, parameters of a span, the enumerable stuff. Which feature is for you your favorite in C# 13?
So I don't do favorites.
Okay.
They're all my kids. In terms of impactfulness, that one's probably up there, right?
Yeah.
And I like it when you can do a feature when a feature sort of just all of a sudden is able to happen almost on its own, right? I'm not saying there wasn't work involved, but because we've talked about params things forever, like even back in C# 2 when IEnumerable of t was just a thing, people were like, can we have params IEnumerable of t? And it's been like coming up again and again for specific types, And then we did collection expressions, and all of a sudden we realized we just designed all the machinery to create every kind of collection on the planet from elements. Now we can just use it. We can just essentially say params is the same as just not having to put square brackets around the elements when you call the method, right?
Yeah.
And all the machinery is already there to use. So that came out so beautifully, and it addresses these scenarios that have been there for years. One of the last places where arrays had a special status in the language, and you kind of had to use them. Yeah.
Now, before we continue, I want to remind you that until the end of February, you can use the link in the description and claim 11 hours of free C# content. That is the Getting Started in C# and Deep Dive course on Dome Train. Use that link in the description and keep it forever. Now, back to the video. How about the difficulty of performance and the challenge of performance with these features? Because when you try to set the default, I say the default values, but for me it's very interesting that kind of leads into what you said about putting the square brackets around something and removing them. The collection expressions or initializers feature. When you initialize an empty array, you use array.empty behind the scenes, and when you initialize an empty, whatever, it's enumerable, IEnumerable.empty. And we've seen constantly with C# all of these features, all of these incremental updates, which I feel C# 13 is more of an incremental update.
Yeah, that's fair.
Than any other feature release we had in a few releases. We see string interpolation. It wasn't great. We optimized it because it was boxing in some cases. And then initializing collections, it wasn't great. We fixed that. For me, what I found funny about this new feature of collection initializers is that dictionaries were not there. And from what I've seen, they're coming in some way in C# 14. But you can create an empty dictionary.
Yes.
That is so funny. And it was not documented anywhere. So I was so frustrated trying to use the feature. I was like, wait, I thought they would do dictionaries. I didn't read the docs, of course. Why is this not working? And out of frustration, I commented out the initializer, and I went on another page to Google, and then I went back and like, wait, the empty initializer is working. This is even more confusing. Not documented anywhere.
Well, it's a consequence of how the feature works.
Yeah.
But it's tricky because we have to sort of, after the fact, we have to create a feature that works across all these things that weren't designed to work together. There's no I am a creatable collection, or I'm a creatable dictionary interface, or something that a marker interface, or something that people intentionally did to their types, right? So we have to create a feature that works with most things. And so what we tend to do is to use, well, we confusingly call it patterns, but it's not pattern matching patterns, right? We look for certain things in a type, and then we say, yeah, that's a collection. That's a creatable collection. Let's do that. And same for dictionaries now. And it just so happened that a dictionary is a creatable collection. It just isn't one that you can add to.
Yeah, but you can make it.
You can make one, and then you're on your own.
Yeah, there's this argument of using var, given a name, and then new, and you say new type, whatever that type is. And with a new way of initializing without specifying the type, if it is explicitly defined on the left, if you say like dictionary of T and T, dictionary equals new, where do you stand? Are you team var or are you team explicit type?
I am team.
I'm expecting a diplomatic answer.
Depends on the context.
Depends on the context.
Oh, was that good? Was it dramatic enough for you?
Good. It was pretty good. It reminds me of when I asked Stephen Tobe about where he stands about STS and LTS, and he says, what I'm about to say has nothing to do with me as a Microsoft employee. I'm going to talk about myself.
No, but
disclaimer.
Yeah, no, but I actually mean the thing about the context, because I really do like the var syntax, but it's not always, like when you're creating an object, you're not always assigning it to a temporary variable, right? Sometimes you're passing it directly to something else. And there it's just really nice not to have to say the type if it feels obvious what you're passing. So,
given that C# 13 was more of a incremental, again, I'm using the same word, but incremental as in it improves on what it's there and it's adding minor things in the language. Is that to address the criticism that C# is just moving too fast, or because we're seeing some massive features on the horizon, with extensions and discriminated unions or union types?
Not really. It was just, it was more of a coincidence of things. I don't think it's a secret that we were hoping for extensions to make it into C# 13, and then we had a big reset after we talked about them at Build. Which wasn't the greatest timing, but these things happen. You're giving your best shot at what you think will be there, and it wasn't, but it meant that we had put a lot of cost into extensions and wasn't wasted. It just meant that we hadn't spent that much time on features that ended up shipping in that release, right? So now we can use that, we built on that to get extensions in C# 14, knock on wood.
You had it here.
And then, it's just, you have small features, you have large features, and the large features tend to be on a multi-year thing, right? And we only typically have one or two in flight at a time. And so sometimes you just have a lot of trains arriving at the station, and sometimes not that many. Yeah.
It's interesting that you have this feature coming, which kind of changed in the way it looks given your presentation today, and I'm going to talk about that. Mm-hmm. But also you have async 2, or I guess async 2 was the experiment. Now you call it runtime async, or what's the official name?
I saw that was the name in GitHub. So that's, but I honestly don't know. We have official names when we ship. Until then, we try our best, but. Yeah.
But that's another massive feature that has been worked on for quite some time after the experiment. And most likely, if you do your job well, no one will realize it's in there.
That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, and that would be amazing. For those of you who don't know what async 2 or runtime async is, if you just quickly recap so they can at least have it in their radar.
Yes, the idea is that async, when we built it, we couldn't change the runtime back then. It just wasn't a thing in those days. So all of the smarts of async, stopping in the middle of executing your method and then resuming later, was done as a compiler-generated state machine thing that's very complex. And objects are generated, task objects are generated at every handoff and so on. And if the runtime gets involved, then a lot of that can be often optimized. Like a common scenario is that you call an asynchronous method and then you immediately await it. Like you don't keep the task around, you don't use it multiple times, you don't do fancy things with it, you immediately await it, which means you do all this work to create the task thing and then immediately throw it away.
Yeah.
So just that kind of thing, we can do much better when the runtime is involved. And now we are happy to tinker with the runtime, unlike back then. So we want to do that, to take that opportunity to get more performance out of the async machinery. At the same time, we have to keep it working with the old stuff and for the scenarios we can optimize and so on. So it's it's a yes and it's not a replacement. It's like we're adding a fast path.
Yeah.
That's probably the way to think of it. We're adding a fast path to the async feature.
And for those who can't visualize, because obviously we're not going to show any code in this, it's more of a chat. But for me, what's very striking is when you go into the HTTP client send async method and you check the internals with the HTTP, I think it's called message handler. All the methods in there, you either have very long methods that should have been extracted, but for performance reasons, because you don't want to introduce that state machine in there, you just smush everything together. And now the advice will be just use a wait async wherever you want, and the runtime will optimize this out of the way, which will get even more confusing because async as a concept has been confusing for quite some time. It's not as confusing as what get a waiter is doing, or get a waiter false. Oh, no, sorry, configure a wait.
Configure a wait.
Wait false, yeah, that's the one. But it is pretty confusing. So it's like, don't use task unless you're expecting an exception. If you're expecting an exception, then do, because you're going to get the better stack trace. It's just, it is kind of confusing. But so it is not a slowdown. I did want to, since I mentioned Stephen already, I did want to ask you, how do you feel not as Microsoft, I'm going to frame it the same way as Stephen, as Mads about the whole STS, LTS situation with .NET support?
I don't have feelings about it, honestly.
So the thing that Stephen raised, which I didn't really think about before, had to do with libraries, because STS libraries, the .NET 9.0.0 version of the hosting package or ASP.NET Core or whatever, you can upgrade to those packages, or EF Core, for example, even if you're in .NET 8 and benefit from all performance improvements. But you have this 6-month gap, I think, if I'm not wrong. After STS is not supported anymore, those packages are also not supported anymore. So what do? You just hope nothing happens within those 6 months. So I think that is, for me, the biggest criticism. And I don't know if the libraries can have a separate support cycle. It gets a bit too confusing, because now you have the Aspire cycle as well.
Yeah, I understand every word you're saying.
Yeah.
It just doesn't really, for me, and this has nothing to do with whether I'm speaking for Microsoft or not. I'm a language person. And I don't really, for me, STS and LTS, they don't make a difference to me.
Yeah.
I ship new language features in every version. I don't ship more in STS or less in STS, or we don't try to hit certain features to one cadence or the other. So it's just not something that's on my mind. I can't even fabricate an opinion about it.
You don't say, for example, this should be an LTS release feature or anything, because many people think, STS is where they introduce something in preview to trial it out, and maybe it will graduate to an LTS.
No, because we have a different mechanism for that. We have lang version preview, so we introduce things in preview, and that doesn't even have to be on a 1-year cycle. We introduce a feature in preview when we've implemented it. And then, or even when when a good part of it is implemented, then you can say lang version preview and it turns on and people can start using it. It's not, we don't use the release schedule for that purpose.
Okay. But does the release schedule, I guess it does, but when you're halfway through the release cycle, and you take a look at extensions, for example, and you're like, we're not going to make it.
Yeah.
But you've already talked about the feature. You end up in this situation where, yes, you're pulling out, which is the wise thing to do, because a bad feature released is bad forever, a good feature delayed is a good feature forever. But you have this community disappointment, which I totally understand. I'm fueling the fire of whenever you sneeze and your sneeze sounds like Discriminated Unions, I'm going to make a video about it. or extensions or
Yeah,
whatever.
you are absolutely part of the problem.
I am absolutely part of the problem, and I remember, and for those of you watching, I messaged you way before when the union types proposal came out, and you're like, I'm gonna stop you right there, wait for like 6 or 7 months because we're still working on it, and later we can talk about it. But there definitely is a community disappointment and this thing is never going to get released. And where I want to draw your attention is the field keyword, which we've been hearing about the field keyword for like how many, 4 releases now?
3 or 4, yeah, I can't remember, yeah.
And from what I understand, it is in preview now.
Yeah.
So in C# 13, if you enable language, you can use it.
Yeah.
And the plan is to officially launch it in C# 14.
Yes.
Okay. And can you explain to people what is the big, because it has a very unique problem, and I think the problem is unique to languages that have been around for 20 years. What's the problem with the field keyword? Introducing it.
I think if I can comment first on the general thing about community disappointment. It is, at some point we went open source, and before that time, like people your age won't remember, but before that time, Anders would come on stage at what was the big conference back then, PDC or something, and we would tell the world, this is what we're doing, it's shipping today. And hopefully it was good, and it was Anders, so it was typically good, but it was completely closed, classic corporate style. And that meant people were never disappointed because they didn't have any expectations. And when we went to open source and to having this completely open design process, and we found that it's not just the open source, right? It also means that now we can talk about things that are still speculative or still in the making, and we try to say the caveats, this is the current plan, and it may change and so on. It's a different game, and it's incredibly valuable and helpful to all of us, I think. People get to participate, and we get that community boost of input and confidence and those kinds of things. It's a much, much better cycle, obviously. But it does mean, because a thing like a programming language happens sometimes in this glacial schedule, and things aren't always always as fast as people would like. It does mean that it often happens that there's some disappointment. The extensions were a particularly perfect storm because we had talked about them at build, and pretty much immediately after realized that the approach we were taking had really fundamental problems that we just couldn't address. Okay, so that made it worse, but it happens from time to time.
Yeah.
And I think it is the cost of doing business this way, that sometimes the surprises are happy and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
But we're all in this together. To the field,
yes,
it's not a complicated feature, and it shouldn't have taken this many years. The thing that it brought up was the question of breaking changes. Okay, so C#, like much of .NET classically, has been insanely focused on not breaking people from version to version. And that's great, and it's part of what people like about many Microsoft products is we're safe, we're not going to get randomized as much, okay? But sometimes you just end up with a situation where the cost of avoiding breaking changes is too hard. And in C#, the bigger the language gets, the more corner cases there are that you can break and that a new feature might interact with. And in some cases, it has led to us landing on designs that in hindsight, I kind of regret a little. I could mention discards, for instance.
Yeah.
In many ways, they're a favorite feature of mine, but because they had to be worked in around, discards are underscores.
Yeah.
But because underscores can be variable names in older C#, the reasoning about when they're underscores and when they're not, when can I copy paste code from one place to another or not, is bad. Only because the rules are, you just can't understand them. Because the rules aren't based on logic, they're based on not breaking anything that was available before. So we didn't want to do that again with field. So instead, it's a little more of a breaking change. And the original design was quite a lot of a breaking change. And so we were blindsided by that a couple of times and kind of tried to deal with that. And now we're at a point where we have a design that is less breaking.
Yeah.
And also, we've grown a little more courageous. So we're willing to take a little bit more of a break.
Yeah.
And then, rely on tooling maybe a little more to help people over the hump of the break.
Yeah. Are you referring to adding the @ symbol if you already have a field named variable in your code base to prevent? And that is a very interesting approach because, yes, it looks like you're now willing to break some stuff to actually make the language a better language, because not having the field keyword, the experience is pretty bad. You go from an extremely clean one-liner to hell.
Yeah.
You have to introduce the variable, you have to store it, you have to manage it. It's not great. So I'm glad you're adding it, but Microsoft being Microsoft, you also don't want to break people. So you might break someone, but at least you're going to introduce the tooling to make sure you don't break.
I assume we will.
Everyone.
That's the intention, yeah.
And if you name the field, but it makes sense in the context, like a football field, let's say, then okay, but use good names
Yes.
on your
Use good names.
variables.
But it is a bit of a change because we have done breaking changes before, but we kind of argue that that people shouldn't do that. So it's kind of okay to break them, or it's a corner case. But this is a case where absolutely fine code that didn't violate any guidelines whatsoever can now break. So that is a bit of a new step for us, and I'm very, very curious how it plays out, because it's a canary in the coal mine kind of situation. We're willing to take some risk on this one and kind of maybe have a few wobbles in how the tooling is best. Maybe we start out with something and then it turns out we need to tweak it. But we're ready to learn from that experience and hopefully have it open the door to us being able to do this once in a while. We don't want to break left and right, but when a design is obviously right, and when making it non-breaking is obviously bad, and the feature is valuable.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if we can find a way to do that.
Yeah, because var didn't exist in the language and then it was added. Var getting introduced would be a breaking change. Of course, at the time when it came out, way less C# code out there. Same with async. Dynamic, we don't care.
Actually, async was not a breaking change.
But you can have, it wasn't the naming of a wait. What if var async, you're right, it wouldn't be a breaking change.
Var could have been a breaking change.
Var, yeah.
But it wasn't.
Yeah.
Because actually, if you declare a type called var, lowercase var, then we use the type. That's how scared we were of breaking changes back then. So we actually do the stupid thing there and say, if the var keyword only means var if there isn't a type in scope. There are people, there were even people, not on my team, but adjacent teams that didn't like the var feature, who would declare internal classes called var to prevent their colleagues from using the var feature. What? Because it would pick up the type name instead. So that's the kind of thing we want to get away from.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I want to move away from I say I want to move away from the feature. Maybe let's stay on the keyword subject, because you've been adding keywords in C# like it's like your part-time gig. we got allows ref struct in C# 13, which is something for you guys. Nobody outside of Microsoft knows how it works. I'm joking, of course. It's a great feature, and I'm going to talk about it in the channel at some point. It's allowing us to do some really cool stuff. But now you're adding extension as a keyword as well. And you have extends, and you have, I think C# has more than 70 keywords, or I could be wrong, but like an incredible amount.
Yes.
And how are you thinking about the experience of a junior developer coming into the language compared to like a Python and a JavaScript, and then you see C#? And out of curiosity, you say, okay, let's see the keywords I have to learn. And you see this curtain of you even see let, the keyword let, which can only be used in link and only in the, is it called, not the query syntax, it's the...
Yeah, it's called query expression.
It's called query. So you can have it there, but only there.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? And do you care about adding too many keywords? Is there too many keywords?
I don't know. I mean, a language this old, yeah, and we've added a lot of things, but most of the keywords are contextual keywords. So what I would say is to the junior developer, don't start by going and looking at the list of keywords, because most of them you will never see. And most of them you don't need to know about because they're contextual. And so if you're never in that context, you can just use them as variable names. You don't need to avoid let, because it's not a keyword unless you are in a query expression.
Yeah.
There are many things in query expressions that are only keywords in the query expressions. They're particularly bad. But I think the whole contextual keyword thing is, yes, could we have fewer words? Maybe, but and a contextual keyword, just to explain, is the idea that, the syntactic context typically, or like they're only keywords based on context. And there are most of the keywords in C# are contextual. Even get and set, which have been in the language all along, they're actually contextual keywords.
That's true.
You can just have a variable called get. So that helps, because you only need to worry about keywords if you're going to A, use them, or B, in which case you're in the context where they should be keywords, or B, you want to declare something else of that name, and then it's only a problem if you are in the context of the contextual keyword. So it's not as bad.
I see. You have famously said that, I'm pulling out the good quote. You have famously said, and I want to quote you here, that if you're writing C#, you shouldn't feel any negative emotions.
Have I said that?
You have. NDC Sydney 2024. I'm going to put a clip.
Oh my God, it's not even a year ago.
And so you said that. Then why do I want to jump out of the window when I'm using a primary constructor and I can't declare something as a read-only as a read-only field?
Well, it sounds like I was stating an ideal to work towards, primary constructors, so maybe all your viewers have heard about this enough that they know this by heart, but a primary constructor can, has its parameters on the class, and so they can, if you reference these parameters outside of construction time, then they get kept around in the object as state that methods and so on can. So they, in a sense, they're like an alternative to fields that become part of object state. And people like their object state. Sometimes people like their object state to be read-only, and they state that explicitly on their fields. And now they can, things that used to be fields that they would like to make primary constructors, now they feel they can't because they can't declare a primary constructor parameter read-only. That's the problem.
Yes.
And the problem we have is that there are two possible features that you might want that both would result in having read-only on primary constructor parameters, but they would mean different things. And we are unwilling to choose at this moment. One is, because it's a primary constructor parameter, I want to make it read-only as a field. And the other one is, I want read-only parameters everywhere. And primary constructors should be one of those places. but those aren't actually, those don't have the same semantics. The difference is, can you assign to them during construction time and stuff like that? And maybe we'll get over ourselves and do one of them just for, we might.
Yeah.
But it gave us pause at least. Like the good thing about shipping every year is like we can, often a good option for us is let's wait and see. We could add it or we couldn't. If we add it, we're stuck with it. It might clash with, we might regret it in the future. It might not have been worth the effort. We won't know. But if we're in doubt, let's not. And let's see how many people want to jump out the window. To say it.
Probably just me.
And then we can just add it later. And I know that if you're living on the cutting edge of C#, it's the weight. You've already referred to that multiple times, right? You make a living off of being on that edge and a little ahead of it. And so, the weight. But we think of C# in this massive arc of history too, right? Where it's like, a year or two. What's a year or two? It's been around for a quarter century. It's going to be around for at least another quarter century. And we want to make sure that we don't get so caught up in racing and doing, racing against the clock that we do foolish, short-sighted things. We want to make sure that the story arc lands us in a pretty place. Yeah,
I see. For me, the biggest issue with the feature or the lack thereof, it's not really that you don't have it there. That's totally fine. I respect it. I'm really annoyed at IDEs when they introduce a refactoring that says, take your read-only field that you're injecting on the main constructor and move it to the primary constructor. Because now you're changing semantics. Now it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
I used to have a read-only thing, and now you say, do not recommend it. Or if you want to recommend it, give me the option to potentially turn it off. I guess I have it if I just say do not suggest refactoring, but it's really annoying because when I trust the refactoring, I think it just makes my code better. I don't think it changes it. If you have an if-else statement and you return inside the if at the end, remove the else. It doesn't change anything and you reduce nesting.
I agree with your interpretation of what a refactoring should do.
Yes.
Yes, that sounds painful for you. I'm glad I don't make refactorings. I have no responsibility. That's
Ryder to blame. I have to say it here. JetBrains, get your shit together. I don't know if Visual Studio is suggesting it. I'd have to check. There's a good chance it does.
I think I played around with that at some point, and it felt like it was doing reasonable things.
Yeah.
It's not that primary constructor parameters are useless when you want read-only. It's just that they don't abbreviate things quite as much for you.
Yeah.
Because you still have the parameters, but you need to also declare the field, the read-only field, and initialize it. But you still get away from having to write the constructor, and you still maybe can capture the other parameters. Depending on it. So it's not that the feature doesn't work. It's that it is less of a shorthand. It doesn't help you elide as much of your code is really the issue.
For me, and I've said it before many times in the channel, but for me, I think Kotlin is a very well-designed language, mainly because of the benefit of hindsight. It saw what Java did, then it said, how can we use the good aspect of C# there? And one of the great things that primary constructors there have, and I'm not sure how aware you are, but you can use the var or val keyword. And the var is a variable that can change, and it's a mutable thing. And if you define val, whatever you're injecting in the name, then that can't change. It's immutable, basically. Yeah. And that is implicitly read-only. And I really like how short it is, because I understand why sticking a 7-word or 8-character word read-only on everything you're injecting, which everything in a C# is a service, a manager, a factory, and then the name is usually the same thing, but in camel case, I can see how it gets very, very cluttered very, very quickly. And then what's the best practice? Buy a longer monitor or a new line every parameter. And if you do that, then you just put it in it gets very, very confusing. But I think Kotlin solves that in a very nice way.
Yeah. I think honestly, for parameters, in hindsight, I think I would just have made parameters always read-only. Like just implicit read-only. Of course, that would be a massive breaking change to do now. Yeah. It is very, I mean, there are neat little tricks you can do when your parameters are mutable, but honestly, it's not something people would have missed if they hadn't had it. I think that would have been the better way to go. Now that we have mutable parameters, making people add extra characters to parameters, like if you're thinking about the more general, like having parameters be read-only, if you have to add like even 4 extra characters, val and a space, for instance, we've talked about it as an attractive nuisance, right? Because people feel like, oh, I have to, I should in order to be safe. But in most cases, you're already doing the right thing. It's very rare that people accidentally mutate a parameter. Yeah. You know, it doesn't really happen. Yeah. Maybe with the exception of primary constructor parameters. That is, like, I am open to that because they are parameters for a bigger scope than like for a single method, right? They're actually parameters that are accessible across multiple members, so that maybe there is something to be said for it there. But otherwise, why make it so that people, oh, I want to be pure, I want to be safe? They have to sprinkle all kinds of crap all over their code when they were just fine before. Yeah.
So C# is famously Microsoft's version of another thing that existed before it, Indonesian coffee made by Sans Microsystems.
You can say it.
Okay, it was made for Java to not compete, but I guess be controlled more at the time than Java could be controlled. Obviously, for me, starting with Java, and obviously you've also designed or helped implement, was it delegates in Java?
I helped design and implement
generics?
The wildcards aspect of generics.
Yes. Yeah. So your history is not just C#. You've worked on other things as well. For me, Java peaked at around version 8 with the 1.8 JDK, but after that, they started catching up because they stayed there for a very long time. Of course, they had the license change and Oracle coming in and all that nonsense. But there was a point where Java keeps releasing features, and some of them are very good in my opinion, or modernized versions of existing ones, or really bad. See how they did string literals, or the 3 quotations that we got. I can't remember exactly the name of the feature in C#. But they finally got around to solve their await async equivalent problem. Is there something that Java has added or is planning to add that you think C# should have? Because I would think that now C# is ahead as a language, but maybe you can learn something from people that are behind and maybe catching up.
I can't point to a specific thing right now, but it has occasionally happened that, they actually have something. They had like what we call default implementations and interfaces. They had that feature way before we did, and we eventually copied them and also, used a lot of their. We had benefit from a lot of their experience. The benefit of hindsight, I should say, when we did that. So it does happen. I so happened to have beers with one of the Java designers the other day.
Oh,
because it's a small world.
Spill the tea. Tell us.
And no, it was just it was interesting talking about our approaches to design. Like we go way back, and it was very informal. We were just chatting, but it's interesting that and wonderful to see Java really is very, very serious about language design. And they have multiple people writing very detailed specs and a very rigorous process around it. It totally gives me imposter syndrome because we are kind of lackadaisy about our process, to be honest, right? You can, and that's not a secret because you can just see it on GitHub. Oh yeah, we should. I mean, we do quality stuff. We arrive at it very differently. And so what I often see I think there's a little bit of a maybe I'm overinterpreting, there's a little bit of a difference of feel that has been in the culture of these languages ever since they started, where Java tends to err on correctness and, the systematic composition of everything, and C# tends to err a little more on comfort and flow and those things.
Yeah.
And both really have value. It was fun to kind of be reminded of that again, like, we actually, it's not just that we have different piles of features. There's kind of different feels and different cultures around the language that affect its evolution and how features come out.
Yeah, and on the subject of languages, F#, great language.
Yes.
Generally underappreciated and underrated. I have recently started learning it.
Oh, good.
Because you've done so many functional programming talks. And I'm like, I have to understand where he's coming from, because I feel like I'm not there yet on that subject. Not that I necessarily am a big fan of OOP, and C# as a language has been moving generally to a functional direction way more than I think of OOP. And the way I explain eventual consistency in programming is, think of it this way: if there's a good F# feature, we will eventually make it into C#. That's what happens. So what is the next good F# feature that you think will get into C#, will go in C# outside of union types? Because I saw the way you're looking.
Oh, I should have.
Because everyone knows about discriminated.
My poker face wasn't good enough. Okay. The next F# feature that I would like to have a C#, I would really like to have a C# response to is, in fact, type providers.
Okay.
It's an old feature now in F#, but the effect of it is that you can write in F#, it's kind of like a little compiler plugin. So I don't like the way they do it, because I wouldn't want compiler plugins to be part of a feature in C#. But the effect of it is essentially you have some unstructured or untyped or semi-structured data out there, would be a JSON or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever, and you can represent it at the same time as if it has a bunch of types. You get a strongly typed experience against it. And as we were presenting what we thought was going to happen with extensions at Build last year, part of the feature complex that we were envisioning and that we now kind of put on the back burner would in fact give us a way to address that. Because essentially you could put and do it in the language. You could put like a wrapper type on something else in a very lightweight way, in sort of a pretend way.
Yeah.
Like extension methods are kind of pretend, but you can do it like selectively. I can give this object, like let's say it's a JSON object. Yes. I can give this JSON object.
Is this the implicit and explicit extension?
Yeah, that's what it was called. We sometimes call it roles.
Roles, yeah.
And so you can essentially say this one's a customer, this one's an order, this one's and you can give them types even though they're all the same type under the hood. Actually, just like all TypeScript types are really just an illusion on top of a dictionary, right?
Yeah.
So it would give you like a strongly typed experience on top of something that isn't inherently at the .NET runtime level strongly typed. Now we also have source generators, and so if you go and point a source generator to like a schema or even some like sample data and say generate some roles for this data, then you would be able to code against it without anything changing in the run. You're able to get the strongly typed coding experience against it, which is exactly the type provider experience. That type providers long ago inspired me to there's got to be a way in C# to do that. And I can sort of squint and see it now, except we had to give up on that part of the feature. Hopefully we'll come back to it at some point. But that's one of my favorite F# features because it doesn't just think about the language itself, but it thinks about the experience of using the language.
Yeah.
And I would like to come back to that.
Is there any VB feature you'd like to add to C#?
I think we got most of them at this point that were kind of worth stealing.
Yeah.
There might still be some, but it's been a while, I think, since we went.
And if you were to look outside of Microsoft's languages, what would you be interested in adding?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or at least entertaining the idea?
Yes. There are various features that are related, but not quite the same. There's associated types in some languages, and there's what Scala calls abstract types, which might be my favorite version of the feature, which are kind of an alternative to generics, or a kind of generics, that the really short version is they help you not have so damn many type arguments all the time.
Yeah.
Okay? Essentially, think of it as a class, instead of a class having a type parameter saying, I'm like an animal with a type argument saying which kind of food it eats.
Yeah.
Okay? That means every time you talk about animals, you have to pass type arguments around. That's really annoying, because what kind of food it eats is inherent to it. It shouldn't be like something on the outside. It should be a member saying, my food type is.
Yeah.
Okay? And if you do that, then you can kind of tamp down on a lot of the, sometimes you just end up in generics overload, or passing the same stuff around. And every one of these related types has a type argument for which particular implementation of the other related interface it is using, and they all carry the same 5 type arguments around all the time. So that would be a feature, if we can get it right, and if we can work it into the runtime and its limitations, and we are occasionally talking about it, that could be a really, really beautiful and quite impactful addition to C#. That's one of the biggest ones out there that I would really like to do, that is almost impossible, but maybe not, and that just have a beautiful impact.
I see.
Make code cleaner again.
Yeah, it is. There's so many things the more you get exposed to other languages. And I think C# developers have been spoiled in a way that we are kind of getting the best version of something else that already exists. And I want to go back to extension everything, or at least that was what the feature was called. Does it have a different name now?
I think current working title is simply extensions.
Which already exist in C#, or extension methods exist in C#.
Yeah, so maybe extension members.
Extension members.
How about that?
So what would that include? It would include methods, which we have, but there's going to be a new way to do this now, what I understand. Indexers, and properties, and that's it for the first version of the feature? Or are you planning to have more?
Let's see how far we get.
Okay.
But we have our goal right now, the thing we're currently building on, here's the minimum viable product that we're aiming to put into preview as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
That is methods and properties, both of them static and instance.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah.
Now, indexers are so close to properties in many ways that they may just sneak their way in along with
Just
those.
naturally.
But they're lower importance to us.
Yeah.
So if they jump the queue, it's just because they fall out, and it would be as expensive to avoid them. And next on the list is operators.
Operators.
Extension operators, yes.
Okay, and that would come, and again, we say it would come, best case scenario, right? Things would get delayed naturally if they have to be delayed, if they're not ready. But would you be aiming to have that in C# 14?
I would, like, the way I think about it currently, I would be entirely happy if we have those things, like including the operators. We want our library teams want the operators now, so we're going to try to make it in. They're more complicated to figure out than the others.
Yeah.
So they're the most stretch goal for C# 14. if we get all of that, I'm entirely happy and blissful. I have no ambition to go for the others. And actually, there are many, even if we did have time, I think it's still an open question whether we even want to.
Yeah.
And I would like to see these like core ones have a little time in the, in the field, so
in the universe, to see how they're being used.
Yeah, and to see what people ask for next. And
it's going to be constructors. Extension constructors.
It's possible.
Yeah.
What else is left?
Async constructors is another thing.
Oh, yeah.
Even though we go into completely separate territory there.
Yes, yeah.
I've heard of that so many times.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What about async constructors? Why? So it wouldn't be hard to implement as a feature.
Wouldn't it?
I'm assuming. I'm not a compiler engineer, though.
No, it's not so much the implementation. Like, what is the feature even?
Exactly.
Because an async method, the way we designed async methods is they're not really, from a consumer perspective, what makes them async isn't whether they have the async keyword or not. You can't even see that. That's an implementation detail. Yeah. It's that they return a task or a task-like substance, so to speak.
So the most common use case for something like that would be, I have a class. Upon initialization, it needs to have some state.
Yeah.
I want to put it in the constructor. Now, where I stand here is don't do that. The constructor should just pass the parameters, make a static method that returns the class type, call it initialize async or create async or whatever, and make a factory-like experience and control that async flow like this. But it's not uncommon for people to have add singleton or add transient or add whatever in dependency injection, and they just naturally, if it's a singleton, they might have to initialize some state, and they want to do that on startup, so whatever.
No, and it's not, I understand the scenario and the desire for it. I'm just like, so how would you expect, okay, let's say you have async constructors. What do you expect, what happens? What do you get back when you call one?
Yeah.
Do you get a task of the new type? Or can you put in right now you can put task or value task or whatever in an async method, and that's dealer's choice, right? Whoever writes the method gets to choose that. Where do they put that? In a constructor signature. There's no place for the return. The return type is the name of the class, is the
public async, the name of the class.
Yes, exactly.
So that would be the...
But where do you put the task part of it? Where do you say that?
You don't have it, I guess.
And
that would be the thing.
Which one do you get? I mean, there's just so many questions.
Yeah, you're right.
And maybe we could solve them. But
it will have to look different. And then if you introduce async in a non-task context, then people will be like, why does this work here and not somewhere else? And then you're going to confuse juniors even more. That's a very valid point, because otherwise you'd have to go public, async, task, my type, and then are you returning task or are you returning my type?
Yeah.
The consumption looks easy. It would be var new whatever equals async new the type. But on the declaration side, you're right. It's not going to be that easy to settle on a design.
And there are probably solutions to it. We could probably figure it out. But honestly, it's been less of a... There was a little bit of pressure for the first couple of years.
Yeah.
But I think people are generally getting more comfortable using factory methods for more things anyway. That's becoming more and more of a pattern. Constructors do have their limitations.
Yeah, I see.
And now you can even have virtual static factories, right? Through static interface members as well. So you can abstract over them, which you can't over constructors.
I see. With the design of extensions, everything changing quite a bit from what you first showed, what we're going to get with extension members, I guess. It's quite different. The roles aspect of that feature, do you think it's going to make it in C# some capacity? Because it was sort of it could be used as a different use case in some cases. And I quite like that design. It does make C# look as itself as a less cohesive language, because it doesn't really point you in one direction and tells you, do OOP, do this, but you can do many things with roles. But I like that freedom that something like that would add, and the ability to disguise a type as another type and be able to deal with it in a separate way. Do you think this feature could be called just roles and be added in a future version?
I think that is very possible.
Okay.
We just put it on the shelf so that we could get the give me extension scenario dealt with, and we've separated the two now, and they'll probably still, like syntactically, they will, if it comes back, it won't look like what extensions are going to look like.
Yeah.
Syntactically, those two features have been divorced from each other. Semantically, they will probably have a lot in common because they are about, intercepting functionality in a way. So I suspect that if and when we start looking at it, there will be some commonalities. But they will have to make it in their own right, and they will have to, and that's good, because what turned out when they were kind of joined at the hip was that there was a role and extension side of things, if you will, the explicit and implicit extensions, as we call it. And the extension side brought most of the interest and value, not all of it, but like the majority of it. And the other side brought most of the complexity.
Yes.
And so the interesting question is, once the dust has settled and we're ready to take a look at it again, can we do roles in a way that they carry their own weight in terms of value? Does the feature value still justify the complexity, and or can we reduce the complexity to where that becomes the case?
I see. I want to move past C# 14, and I want to go what might come later. We only have 2 minutes, so I'm joking. And that is union types, discriminated unions, whatever you want to call them. I think the official proposal talks about type unions or union types, one of the two.
Type unions.
Type unions, I think is the name. And it has been out now for a few months.
Yeah.
And it has many comments and many opinions, and I've expressed my opinion as well. And the millisecond you published it, I made a video on that. And people in my comments had opinions about the design. And I don't know if you read the comments or if someone in the team reads the comments, but there was some very interesting points about where this is heading. How do you feel about this original proposal? And do you think that's something we can get in C# 15 maybe, even in preview if it is?
So the proposal, and I was involved in like what became that proposal, it's more like a vision document, right?
Yeah.
It's really very high level, is kind of trying to paint the field of the design space. But at the same time, so it has like different options, but at the same time it's making some pretty strong, it has some pretty strong opinions that kind of apply across all of them. And each of the proposals could coexist with any of the others. Like they're not necessarily alternatives. They could be part of a cohesive like union story. Any subset of them could coexist. So I think I like that we arrived at this degree of clarity around what our options are. The type unions, the use of the word types there reflects that one conclusion that we reached is that in C#, unions should be unions of types, okay? If you look at F# or other functional languages, discriminated unions are not unions of types. They're unions of something with a name, a tag, a discriminator, what you want to call it, the tagged unions, that can then be deconstructed to give you values of one or more types. Okay, so the different options are like named options, but they're not things in and of their own right. They're just a means to get to what's inside. In C#, one thing that we agree on is that that has to change. It has to be that the things are types. So you don't have to like pattern match on a union and get an A and immediately, oh, you get a dog, and immediately you have to decompose it into how many legs it has and what it eats, you know? You can or what its name is, you can carry it around as a dog. It makes sense in its
Yeah.
own right, and it can be its own object, right? So that's essentially trying to take an object-oriented view on what discriminated unions would look like.
Yeah, because fundamentally, discriminated unions are a very functional programming concept.
Yeah.
And they don't fit in a language that already has inheritance.
Right.
Because the idea is it's their version of inheritance.
Exactly.
So you cannot have double inheritance, because then
Right.
what's the direction of the language? So for me, what stood out, of course, you had 4 variations, I think, of that original vision, that they cannot coexist. And the way I read it was they would coexist, like all 4 would be part of the language.
Yes, but don't read too much into that.
Okay.
It's not, we propose that this particular thing becomes the future. It's really just trying to lay out a vision that speaks coherently about things.
And what I really liked was the custom unions at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think custom unions is what people nowadays in C# are using libraries to basically implement.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if you're using one-of, or if you're using language extensions and whatever other thing, even your own custom type, whether that's for result, whether that's for option, whether that's for your own types of like customer created, email not found, or whatever error you want to represent, that would cover all those use cases. And then we would have them all in C#, which can benefit again from the team's ability to optimize those things as well to a compiler level, and the JIT can there's just so many things you can do. So how are you going to sort of manage the messaging around the feature? What is the feature there for, from your standpoint? How would you sell it to a traditional C# developer that only does OOP and they're very strong on the inheritance and everything?
Well, to those people, well, in general, I will probably say that unions are about 2 things. They give you 2 things. One is they give you exhaustiveness. Unlike inheritance, where you can have as many derived classes as anybody wants, anybody might declare a derived class, you get a closed list. It's exhaustive, and you get to depend on that exhaustiveness, for instance, when you do pattern matching. Yes, I've covered all the cases. There will be no more cases. So that's one feature that people are asking for, and that's one aspect of the benefit. The other aspect is that union types tend to have an incredibly terse syntax for declaring your data model. And so if you really have a data model that is not, especially if it's not very object-oriented, so it doesn't have a lot of like virtual methods and stuff, but you're really just about how data is composed, then it'd be nice to have a really sweet syntax for expressing that, kind of like what records do, especially if you use positional records.
Yeah.
You can have a super terse expression of your hierarchy. Now we could get that last bit of, and these belong together and they're exhaustive, and you don't even have to say class, you don't have to express the inheritance. Maybe we can elide even the inheritance from the records that you already have today. So it's kind of that next level of super terse. Yeah. Super readable, some would say.
What makes functional programming to you so attractive that I'm sure we see MADs in C# ever since you took over. What goes in, yes, there's many people getting involved, but as the lead designer, there's some of you in that language. And there's many functional features that have making it into C#. What is it about functional programming or functional language?
It's funny. I think the thing about it is that it is no more or less beautiful and internally consistent than object-oriented programming, but it's different. And that difference can be profound sometimes. Like the way object-oriented programming and functional programming approaches certain things and looks at the world, are fundamentally at odds with each other in a way that means that they have different trade-offs, they have different pros and cons. And so sometimes in the object-oriented world, where we're talking about the cons, bringing in the functional alternative next to it and trying to make them coexist, and trying to do it tastefully and unify it and all that stuff, and make it feel like C#, that then gives the developer the choice to get the benefits that you would get in the function approach. So it's really, at the end of the day, it's that they're both beautiful, but they're also wonderfully different. Yeah. So it gives, essentially, for a bunch of important things, it's the menu of the other version of everything, the other option for everything. Yeah. And sometimes we can go and say, time to bring that in.
Yeah.
As an example, maybe, like pattern matching. Mm-hmm. Pattern matching and virtual methods. They are each other's corresponding features in functional versus object-oriented programming, right? They are the way that you get type-dependent behavior, but they have opposite kind of structure to them. When you do type-dependent behavior with virtual methods, you list you have an exhaustive list of all the methods, all the virtual methods in the base class, or the interface. So centrally you decide, these are the functions that will have type-dependent behavior, but then you can have as many, as we talked about, as many derived classes as you want that override and implement their own version. So that's open-ended, closed list of operations, open-ended number of types. Mm-hmm. And pattern matching are therefore the opposite approach that functional programming has, which is when you write a function, you just write a function. And it takes a type, a union type maybe, and then for every shape, for every case of the union, it implements all in the same function body. It implements the version. If it's this type, do that. If it's this type, do that. If it's this type, do that. So it's completely the reverse. You can have as many type-dependent functions as you like. It's open-ended. But each of them has a closed list of types that it knows about and can deal with. Yeah. And why is one better than the other? Well, when the types are essentially data in the cloud, long-lived data with long-lived schema in the cloud, it doesn't make sense for that data to be encapsulated with all this functionality, right? I'm building a service. I do my own functionality over those. You're building an app that does its own functionality. The functionality is short-lived and distributed, and you want to have an open-ended, growable set of it independently of each other. The thing that's kind of more eternal and long-lived and needs to be shared is the set of types, right? And so you want it the other way around. And pattern matching comes into C# to deal with that problem, essentially.
Yeah. I never thought of the whole pattern matching and virtual method thing, but when you explain it, it's so clear. Because I've never worked with a fundamentally functional language extensively. So it's so interesting to hear you discuss it. If you could take over as lead designer of some programming language outside of Microsoft's language, what would that be and why?
Well, I don't think I can answer that.
Okay.
And not because I don't want to, it's just
because I'm probably going to get a job offer if I say that.
I can tell you some things that would have to be true.
Okay.
It would have to be a language that has good bones. Mm-hmm. I don't want to come in to rescue a language that's horribly awry and then try to okay?
So Java is off the table?
Not necessarily. I have to have good bones, like I feel C# does, like good inherent culture. It would have to be popular, because I really, really like working on a language that has many uses. It doesn't have to be the many millions that C# has, but it would have to be a language that's in popular use, not just for some, internally in some company and never exposed to the public or whatever. I think I like having broad usage too much. It's too fun to have all the use cases that way. And I would want to feel that I can contribute positively to its future and not screw it up.
Yeah, okay. many languages, I think, out there that would fit that description. For me, it's there has to be popular aspect of it, because let's say something like Rust. It is popular in a sense that people like it, and those who use it like it, and it has a lot of hype around it, about the borrowing, the memory, the everything, but it's not necessarily doesn't have millions of users, not by a long shot. And F#, for example, I know I said outside of Microsoft languages, but F# has a very dedicated audience. Those who use it love it. Those who don't love it haven't used it yet. So I'm going to not push you further on this subject because I understand your position. That's very interesting. That you even say it has to be popular, because for me it's very honest. Because for me, when I make a video or whatever, sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, you gave this title or you made this thumbnail. You're doing it all for the views in a way." And it's the same thing. You want to be exposed. You want to be viewed. You want to be used. You want as a language. I mean,
yeah, yes. I don't care about the numbers.
Yeah.
I know you probably make money based on the numbers. So you have to care about the numbers. I don't actually. I don't have like somebody tallying up at the end of each business year and saying, I'm sorry, but only adoption only grew by 3%, so no bonus this year. So that's not how it works. It's not. That's not what I mean when I say it's not like this. It's not like this quantity. It's that it's more like the vibrant, open, diverse community aspect of it. The fact that C#, for instance, is used in so many different ways by so many different people in all the countries of the world, like rich banks here in London. To places on the planet that barely have power, and the more like that kind of diversity, kind of being able to not harness, but kind of integrate with all of that in a language that has its own unique culture.
Yeah,
that makes it so fun. Like essentially. Whatever version of I don't want to make a programming language just for rich white dudes. It's that kind of. I like. So I mean that both literally, but also kind of symbolically. Like the fact that it's appreciated and engaged with so broadly gives me a lot of work pleasure.
Yeah.
And I like the kind of responsibility it gives me. I like that I'm not here to make some guy rich.
Yeah.
I am here to create developer happiness, such as it is, as broadly as possible.
And strong emotions as well. I think we see them positive and negative when someone doesn't agree. But it is to happen when you have so many people, and when you have so many people that really, really love the language.
Yeah.
And the more you keep up to date with everything, the more you understand that there's love not only from the audience, but also from you guys building the language.
Yeah.
If I would have one criticism for the language, and that's more about .NET than C#, by the way, it's that I think, on your point about I don't want to make a language about rich dudes, C# is not a Ferrari, it's not a Lamborghini. C# is a Ford. That's how I like to. And Ford has some great cars like the GT40 and Ford GT. But it also democratized in a way the car as a concept. So I think of C# the same way. It's funny, I was on LinkedIn the other day and some guy messaged me and I saw his job description is like CEO at 8 Sleep. 8 Sleep makes smart beds.
Okay.
And because I Googled snoring once, I've been bombarded by their ads. And the guy reached out to me, he's like, Nick, love your videos. Our entire microservice backend for all the metrics from the bed and everything is built in .NET. We're using C#, and we're sharing your videos internally to whatever. We want to hire .NET developers remotely, so like put it in your newsletter as we're hiring. And it was the most unusual place you would expect to be using .NET, a startup making beds, smart beds, but you would. And my startup as well is made entirely in .NET. Running in microservices. So I'm feeling very strongly about the language. It sounds like you and the team is feeling very strongly about the language. So I say all that to go back to the fourth point, because I do think, in a way, .NET and maybe C# too is trying to be everything. Like it's trying to be an OOP language and a functional language in the same time. In the same way that .NET is trying to be a web framework, but also a mobile thing, but also a front-end thing, but also an AI thing, but also... What do you think about that? And how does it limit or influence your design on the language level? Because I guess that's where you have the most say.
At the language level, I mean, it is, you can say trying to be or not trying to be. For .NET or for C# for that matter, it is already all of those things.
Yeah.
Right? It is, for better or worse, like, I don't think anyone was more surprised that .NET would be used so broadly. Like it started like not that. That's a thing that hasn't been like constant through our start. It started as an application programming language for Windows.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Closed, one platform, one main scenario.
Yeah.
So
the good old days.
But somehow people wanted, like Mono happened, and before we knew it, Unity happened based on the Mono effort, and so people outside of Microsoft just took the language and .NET and ran with it because something spoke to them about it, regardless, that didn't have anything to do with the original intent. And so whether we liked it or not, we started. And then the cloud came along, and we were already big, and so it makes sense to make services. But C# apparently, and I'm saying this incredibly humbly, is too good to be for only one thing.
Yeah.
and it happened.
I'll give you that.
It was not like a strategy from the get-go, but it happened, and we just embraced the fact that all these folks in all these domains and on all these stacks and with all these tools that are Microsoft or not, they love .NET, they love C#, they keep engaging with it, they keep engaging with us, and I'm like, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's not try to pigeonhole it. Pigeonhole, whatever, pigeonhole it.
Yeah, pigeonhole
it. It's just, that situation is what it is.
Yeah. But is there no worry that trying to be a generalist, you can't be a specialist?
Yes.
Is there one of those verticals that I mentioned before, web, AI, whatever, that you prioritize over? Because personally, I think .NET, the .NET stack on microservice API stuff is impeccable. There's just nothing that, in my opinion, even comes close to it in terms of how stable it can be, how reliable it can be, all the tooling and the community, and like, it's crazy how good it is. But I wouldn't say it's the best thing, like cross-platform mobile support. MAUI is there and it exists and it's fine, but it's not the big thing. And Blazor isn't that thing. In fact, web forms is probably still more popular than Blazor, which is natural. Many people are not moving on. How does that affect do you say we need to add this thing because of how popular we are on the API space? Or when we added the Tensor thing, is it a struct, the Tensor struct, or a class that was added?
That would be a value type.
A value type that was added for AI, well, maths, but inherently AI. I just want to know how you think of all that and what you think of all that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. If I ever do mobile app development, I certainly don't do it in multiple platforms. So I can't compare and say what is good and what is bad. I think that even, let's say you don't come to .NET for MAUI or for Blazor. I think for many people, it's still just nice that, okay, I can go and do a front end as well.
Yeah.
And don't have to switch stacks and language and so on. So that's still a benefit regardless of whether it's your core thing or not.
Yeah.
But I think it goes more for .NET than for C# because that of course, there needs to be decisions made around which domains do we focus on, where do we expand and evolve, and where do we kind of let sit. I'm not so involved in those conversations. And unlike the library surface area, the language itself is much less kind of groupable into domains, right? The language is the language, and almost any application domain uses most of the language.
Yeah.
With the exception of all the span stuff and so on. That's probably there are a few parts of the language that are okay. I am systems level, or I'm high performance, but by and large, like the core, what we call everyday C#.
Yeah.
That language is used for all of it. So I'm less involved in those, and they happen, and they, prioritizations happen, and they should, and we don't do everything for everyone just because we feel like there are business decisions in that as well, right? And there's also are we succeeding, are we failing with this, that kind of stuff, as you can imagine. But for me personally, that's less front of mind because I do the language.
Yeah.
And the language is the language.
Yeah. The last time I remember C# doing something, adding a feature based on a use case that Microsoft is popular at, I would say it's dynamic with all the Excel stuff and all the, interrupt with Word, Excel, and Office in general. And it was also because of, was in Iron Python and that stuff that happened. I'm not going to open that Pandora's box because we've been talking for quite some time. So I'm just going to ask you a last question, which is, can you give me 3 features in C# that you would completely remove from less offensive to more offensive, in your opinion? And don't worry, Anders is not gonna say it. So even if it's his time, you can just say it.
Let's see. Well, I think. Well, I can come up with 3, but 2 of them are a little related, so they may be cheating.
Okay.
Okay, let's try. I don't know if I can sort them. Can I just give you a few, and you can?
You're right. There's no favorite child.
We can sort them in post edit. So events. I hate events with a passion as a language feature.
But you're touching them in C# 14 with partial events, would you?
Yes. The reason I don't think events are bad. What I think is bad is that they got baked in as a language feature.
Yeah.
They should be totally at the library level. And associated with that, I hate delegates.
Really?
I hate them. And you know why?
Why?
Because of events. Because of events, delegates are a collection type. Do you know delegates are a collection type?
Because you can append events.
You can add them.
Yeah, because they subscribe, you can subscribe multiple things in the same event.
And instead of
I never understood that.
And instead of having like a collection of functions, you have a function type that is also the collection type.
Yeah.
So even outside of events, you can just take a delegate, take 2 delegates of the same type. You can add them together. Try doing that. And then the resulting delegate, you can run that, and you know what it does?
Is it the execution of both?
It executes them in some order.
Yeah, but not the order you added them in?
Probably, but who knows? And maybe one of those delegates was itself a list of delegates inside, and what if it returns something? What does it return? I think it's probably the result of the last one that gets executed. What a mess. Like, what is that? We had one shot at doing a beautiful function type in C# from the get-go, and we do that shit?
Yeah.
So that's just, and looking at what we've done, like we talk about functional programming so much, looking at what we've done with delegates despite of that, essentially just by ignoring the fact that they're collection types.
Yeah.
Do you know that variance in delegates is actually kind of unsound because of that as well? But I will not get into that.
Really?
Yeah, you can make things crash if you're really smart.
How?
We'll talk another time. But it's just like, so we just have to ignore that shit. And also a bit related to that, I wish we had unified void. I wish void wasn't a separate thing. Void should just be a type.
Yeah.
And now all of our generic things are bifurcated, like action versus func, task versus task of T, and so on and so forth. All the same stuff, just because.
So you just have a void type.
You have a void version of everything. Yeah. So you mentioned dynamic, and then you kind of rolled into this question. I think that wasn't entirely accidental. I love many, many things about dynamic. I think it was an interesting and kind of groundbreaking design. Okay,
it is
the way that
great.
The way that it integrates static and dynamic typing so seamlessly is like, we've put my academic brain on. It's beautiful. The world didn't go the way we thought it would. We weren't going to have C# interoperating with Python all the time.
Yeah.
And so the value of the feature, it still has really good scenarios.
I am using it actively to pass JSON when I can't be asked to make an object.
Right. So there are definitely scenarios where it's great, but it's also performance-wise, it's a disaster. Sorry, but it is.
Yeah.
And it's also heavy to maintain, and it's a whole bunch of infrastructure just for dynamic. So it doesn't carry its own weight in value.
Yeah.
And if I knew what I know today, I would not have added it.
Yeah. But with, again, hindsight, you can never know. It could have been something you add and like that thing blows up. Didn't VB.net do something with XML because they thought XML and SOAP was going to be the future, and then because of that burning them, they didn't add JSON support in C#, even with a library, until system.text.json like 4 years ago.
I don't know if those things are connected.
Okay.
But it was interesting. Like when I just joined Microsoft, it was nearly 20 years ago, and I think I gave my first talk on behalf of Microsoft, one of the very first, and it was like a little sideshow at a conference. It wasn't even like a real talk, but I was very new.
Yeah.
But I was starting to understand things. Maybe I wasn't as skilled in like messaging. So people asked me, and VB had just gotten XML literals, and people asked me, so when is C# going to get XML literals? And so I don't think it will. And they're like, why not? And it's like, well, I'm not sure XML is as long-lived of a language as C# will be. And people just burst out laughing. They thought I was making a joke. Because of course XML was the be-all and end-all of data.
Laughing in Microsoft dollars.
Yeah, but I was right.
Yeah.
I just wasn't being very smart about how I put it.
Yeah.
Not taking a dependency on another language turned out to be a really good idea.
Yeah.
It's bad enough having taken a dependency on Unicode.
No, you can date in language in so many ways, and I think the only thing that dates C# is dynamic in the way it was implemented. I think dynamic could exist even today if it was designed a bit differently.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that, Iron Python or Iron Ruby, I also remember.
Yeah.
Because it was dynamic languages. So it wasn't designed with those things in mind and then interop with the Office DLLs. I think it could be a very beautiful feature.
Yeah.
Sadly, it's not, and I don't think we're ever going to come around. I say never say never, but I don't think we're going to see a better dynamic.
We've looked at it a few times. We've had lightweight dynamic on the agenda.
Really?
A couple of times around during the years, implying some things about the other dynamic, I guess.
Yeah.
But it hasn't. It's hard to do a second version of a feature.
Yeah. Do you think we'll ever get something like a val keyword where you can define a read-only variable in a method, let's say, or in a
That I can imagine.
Yeah.
I can imagine that. There are pros and cons, but that seems less far off, I would say.
And the last thing I want to ask, I said the last thing a few times, but I keep asking questions that pop in my brain. It's been a few years now since C# 8 which is the version we got default interface implementations, which is Java 8 was also the version Java got it. Weird connection I made. But the thing I wanted to ask is nullable reference types.
Yeah.
What do you think about launching this feature and the way it was launched? And what do you think about the adoption that you see, if you've seen the space?
What do you mean, the way it was
I mean, so a lot of the criticism I see is that why would I use nullable reference types? Waste of time. Just turn that feature off by default. I don't get it. And I wouldn't get it unless I've done Kotlin before I did C#. Because yes, assuming everything can have that state will make you add, some null checks, but you're not going to add all the null checks. And if you follow through and implement it, it can really change the way you write code and the safety you get just by the compiler saying, this can be null here. And I always turn it as an error. If all of my projects, the templates are changed. So I guess if you were to tell people, should they use them or should they not use them? And any advice about adopting it if you have?
Yeah, well, first of all, we did in fact try, and I think we did a pretty good job at making it so you can incrementally adopt it.
Yeah.
And we made it so it has no impact on whatsoever on the runtime semantics of your code, and that's a guarantee. And so therefore you shouldn't worry about adding it. It won't change how your code runs, that kind of thing. We tried to make it very adoptable, and there are all kinds of, there's actually a lot of complexity in hash nullable, blah, 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 various ways you can turn it on and off so as to adopt it in very selective ways, so it doesn't impact you too much. But all that said, almost the biggest value of nullable reference types is just the syntax.
Yeah.
It's the expression of intent, closely followed then by the number of times the compiler says, hey, this could be null, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah.
And you just saved me half an hour hunting down a bug.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem on adoption was there's all this code in the world, none of it is nullable annotated. We weren't even we couldn't get all our libraries annotated in one release, and so it was kind of this boil the ocean kind of situation. But when you start using it on new code, and then against libraries that are annotated and so on, it really starts showing its value.
Yeah.
The communication of intent, the compiler just saying, hey, you should probably check for null here, and so I think that as soon as people kind of, and now most of the world's libraries are annotated. And
now they are.
And so you get all the feedback from all the types you interact with. So now people can more easily, I think, appreciate the full benefit of it.
Yeah.
It's easier to step into, just especially if you're doing a new so out there, if you're being skeptical, turn it on for your next new project.
Yeah.
And just get used to expressing that intent in all your types, and try to see if maybe it isn't actually being right about those things it's complaining about.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the fact that it's not a complete safety check. It can never be.
Yeah.
The point is, it's so much better than nothing.
Yeah.
And I lost my train of thought. I had another thing I wanted to say, but
well, I'll follow up on what you just said. Maybe
yeah.
you remember, but yes, turn it on a new project. I think as an experiment, turn it on existing projects and see where the warnings pop up.
Yeah.
Because those are potentially places where things can go wrong.
Yes.
Of course, sometimes the things are not annotated, but the default assumption is it can be nullable. So should this be nullable? What do you expect? Or should you tell the compiler, no, exclamation bank operator, this is definitely not null here.
Right.
And you can get around it.
I like that a lot. I would not do it as the first thing, though, because part of what makes it daunting is you turn it on for an existing project, you get a flood of warnings.
Yeah.
They might be great warnings, but who can deal with 100 warnings in one go?
That's true.
Right? And so at least before you do that, familiarize yourself with how you interact with the feature and how it benefits you. Another thing is that I remember the other thing, which is it took us a few releases before we worked out the kinks.
Yeah.
We added more ways of kind of tuning the warning system, that you can add attributes and say, actually, this one takes a null, but it doesn't return a null, that kind of stuff, you know. There were things like required properties that up until we added that, there were common scenarios where nullability was a real pain. Like you couldn't have a good non-nullable property. Yeah. Because it would complain that you weren't initializing it, or that you were initializing it with null.
Is this the equals null exclamation mark?
Yeah, now you have to,
where it's like,
you have to shut it up.
Null is definitely not null.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah.
But because you're initializing it later with the init keyword, it isn't.
And so until we got the feature that essentially says, don't worry, it will be initialized later.
Yeah.
So it's fine for it to be null right now.
Yeah.
So that kind of kinks, finding like the top scenarios that weren't working well, and that I feel like we are through the long tail to the long tail of that. Yeah. And so now it really is a very balanced and complete feature that is a good user experience, and I think will really help you.
Well, awesome. That's all I had to ask. Thank you so much for doing this.
You sure?
Let me check. I think I've asked everything.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been doing this for some time. I don't want to take more. It's been a long day. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Always fun to see you and talk to you. And hopefully next time we talk, extensions are out and union types are in preview. Or I don't know. Yeah.
You can always wish.
I can always wish.
You and I share that wish.
If I could wish for one thing, actually, it would be to get access to your internal Microsoft Visual Studio channel, so I can start downloading those preview features as they get released. But I guess I'll just download the branches because it's all public anyway. Everyone can see where things are. If someone wants to keep track of where C# is right now, what's the best place they should look at? If they want to read about what's coming, about how things are implemented, maybe leave a comment, where would you point them at? Yeah, so the most kind of fine-grained water hose place is the .NET C# Lang repo. Okay. Okay. That is where that's our workplace. That's where our stuff is. And all the discussion with the detailed discussion with the community and with each other, it happens in there. The sign notes come out there. Yeah. Twice a week we have language sign meetings, notes come out, that's where they are. Yeah. So if you really want to follow, you can do that, and you can also like do pretty decent search to find out what's going on. Yeah. The other thing you can do is to follow documentation. Our C# documentation is really good, and interestingly, the documentation for a new preview feature comes out in preview, typically around the same time as the feature comes out. So if you just watch the what's new in, there'll be a what's new in C# 14. It might already be a what's new in C# 14. I checked it. The only thing that's under there for now is breaking changes. Okay. So there's a breaking changes. Okay, so they're a little behind maybe, but generally speaking, so I'm not saying like on the same day, but that's a good way if you kind of just want every couple of months or something like that, get a little like, where have they gotten to? What can I play with now? That has the right granularity for that. And it's good because it also prototypes the feature explanations. Yeah. And so you get to, even if you don't want to interact with the feature design or even the implementation, you can also get to have this kind of participate in user feedback about documentation or even like contribute to it. So that's the next level up. And of course, if you only care once a year, go to watch.NET Conf online, and you'll get the summary there when it ships. Again, thank you so much, and thank you so much all of you for watching. And as always, keep coding.